Thank you very much to the speakers and to all of you who've been listening and reflecting on it. We have 20 minutes, and this is a time now for a broader participation. Can I ask first how many feel they have a question or a comment that they would like to make? Just give me an indication. I see one there, and another there, and all right. I think we could easily run away in 20 minutes with one long question and 4 long answers from the panel, and it'll all be gone. So I'm going to ensure that the questions or comments from the floor are brief. I don't think we need to have every panel member respond to every question or comment, but I'll try to ensure that everybody gets a good go, and so there's good dialogue like that. So where did I see? It was here. Yes, please. Tell us who you are and where you're from, perhaps, if you want to.
Tēnā tātou katoa, ko Vicky Hirenea. I'm from the ISS Centre for Problem Gambling. And my question is that it's all very well to take responsibility in your families. I applaud that. However, has it not escaped your notice that the most pokie machines and the most venues for alcohol are in the areas with the highest population of Māori and Pacifica, the lowest, the poorest housing, the highest rates of state housing, and the highest beneficiary rates. Now those are things that you cannot change just by being motivated. You can't, an 18-year-old Puriroa woman cannot go out and build enough homes in Puriroa to house her cousins. That's what you need leadership for, and that's what I would like you as a party to start being responsible for. Have some policy that takes responsibility for saying, no, we're not going to let there be any more pokie machines in somewhere like Wainuiomata where there are over 90 pokie machines. We're not going to let that happen. They cannot afford.
Can I just cut it off there, please, for time? But a couple who'd like to respond to that from the panel. Yeah. Alfred?
Well, thank you for your question. And look, I totally agree. I mean, have worked with the NGO around issues around alcohol, issues around gambling and so forth. Look, one of the things, I mean, with the gambling, when you're talking about the fact is that can an 18-year-old make a difference? I can give you an example there, for instance, in the Alcohol Liquor Reform Bill, in the consultations that we did, there were a young group of 16 to 18-year-olds at the Glen Innes Action Group. What they did is come together and they said this to their youth worker: can we make a difference to try and influence this bill and this law that's coming through? He said yes. So he took them through a submission process. They met with Sir Geoffrey Palmer and they went through their consultation, and through that they felt that they were able to make a contribution to that. So what has it done in regards to that bill? And I know it's not dealing with the gambling, but just taking an example for where you can help a community to make a difference in that. It's meant that as the legislation comes, what it will allow is for local communities to influence around what you call the legalisation of actually those what you call a liquor outlets being in those local communities as well. But look, it's not. I'm not saying that's perfect, but what I am saying is that I think it is possible, and I do take your point. It's a good point.
Anyone else want to say something on this? No?
I think we probably all here hate the bloody things. I think New Zealand's making a wee bit of progress on this, according to your own report. Number of pokie machines is going down. They are concentrated in areas they ought not to be concentrated in. Society needs to do better there. Powers have been devolved to councils to actually screw that down more, and all power to their own.
Yeah, casinos came here in the late 80s, and so did pokies, under a very unusual Labour Party government. We were told, now we've got all these tourists and all of them coming over here, but they desperately want a casino when they arrive. It's absolute, unadulterated, excuse the language, but crap, and you know it, I know it, and that less than 4% in most countries that go to these casinos are tourists. The rest are domestic. So they ignored all that, they ignored all advice from Hamilton and everywhere else, overrode all that, and then in come the poker machines and they're overriding that as well now. All I can say to you, I can make a lot of statements, but I've never voted for a an easing up of any liquor or gambling law in this country in a long career.
Good. Yes.
Yeah, Richard, my name's Graham Howell. I'm a benefit rights advocate and I've been in this game for, I guess, as long as Tambourine and yourself and others. My comment which I'd like some response to is 3 tiers. One is the wider level debate of the ideology of the market versus intervention and where community sits in that. The other is around education, and Materia mentioned it, training incentive allowance. There are significant changes, restrictions around student allowance, second chance opportunities, and where there's a student who's married and how their partner is included or not, and access to early childhood for beneficiaries. That's a major problem that I see it. In the third tier, and it's minute, the maximums for some areas of income support, like accommodation supplement, have not increased for over 10 years. So that's my 3 tiers. You can comment on any of the 3.
Okay. Terry, would you like to
Yeah, Kia ora. Thanks, Graham. Nice to see you too. Market versus intervention. Housing is a really interesting example. We know that the private market is able to provide and build and afford to build housing at quite for the upper end of the market, but they cannot and will not provide for the affordable end of the market. So this is an exact opportunity, exact time when the state ought to intervene. That should be the responsibility of the state to take up that area where the market is failing, because markets will never be able to manage all of those equity issues. They've got their place, the market has its place, but we have to identify it and then fill the gap. That is part of the social responsibility of a collective, that is the democracy that we have. So I think it won't be the case in every social area. I certainly don't think it belongs anywhere near education myself, but in housing, it is one of the ways that we need to look at the role of the state and the role of markets in providing housing across the board. I don't know enough about the student allowance for partners. What I do know is that with the cutting of ACE funding for adult community education, with the cuts in the funding for post-grad students, we are significantly dumbing down our education system, plus the attacks that's coming from charter schools on our public compulsory sector. So we are seeing an increasing privatisation of the compulsory sector through charter schools, and a dumbing down of our intellectual capacity and our potential by not supporting those who want to go into further education. That directly relates to that initial comment I made around this complete failure to see the potential that is sitting right here in front of us in our young. The third one was
The maximums, for example, accommodation supplement maximums, which restricts the level of income support, has not increased for over 10 years.
Yeah, I don't know enough about the detail of that in particular. What I do know is the accommodation supplement is a serious structural problem because it's operating as a subsidy to landlords, and but it's very big, and to mess with it quickly and radically could cause some real harm for families who are in most need of that income top up. What that probably means then is a much more radical reform of how income support is provided to families across the board, working and not working, in order to manage the income need they have to provide for their housing while not providing this constant subsidy of public money into private landlords. It's a huge structural issue. It's one of those big ones that I was talking about before, where you have to really think carefully through the policy minefield to make it work.
Anybody else want to comment?
The income thresholds and the support questions, I suggest you talk to Jacinda for our point of view on that. I'm less over the detail of that, but Jacinda Ardern is. In respect of do I believe in markets? Yes, I do. I do believe in the efficiency of competitive markets, and so I'm not suggesting that the Labour Party will take us away from a market economy, because I do think it works overall. But I do think that there are areas where markets are imperfect, and where they are imperfect, then there is a cause for state intervention. And a notable example of that is around the quality of housing stock. There is a no market incentive for a landlord to have a properly insulated house that has a heating device in it that's efficient. They don't get a higher rent for it. They don't get, the tenant doesn't have an interest in doing it because they've only got short-term occupancy rights, and so no one does it. And so we've got poorly insulated houses that are unhealthy for the people that live in them, and they actually cause additional cost to society and the health system and poor educational outcomes. There's lots of studies showing that. It's an example of where, because the market is imperfect, you should have government intervention to regulate for a minimum standard. And we've said that we would.
Can I throw something on the end?
Yes.
I'm sorry to. It's just there's something that I feel like hasn't been canvassed publicly, and it's one of the tiers that you've mentioned around access to second chance learning. We have obviously had changes to adult and community education. Now, if you're an older person, you're limited as to whether or not you can access assistance to study. But the latest welfare reforms will also restrict anyone who's covered with a sickness benefit or any sole parent who has children over the age of 14 from study. They basically won't be allowed to access government support and study. Now that's a shift from where we've been. I think it's a narrowing of our ability to enhance adults who want to relearn or retrain or re-skill to enter back into the workplace. It narrows that opportunity. I don't think enough people know about it, so I just wanted to share that.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could, yes, then I'll ask Stephanie after that. I wonder if I could just raise a question about youth unemployment, because the figures are alarming and getting worse, and perhaps has been suggested a lot of it unreported. So it may be far worse than the actual figures. And when we look at what's happening in Europe, with figures there, 40-50% youth unemployment, I think the question I've got twofold. Is this a new phenomenon? I mean, people say, well, this is cyclical, and if we work hard, more jobs, more productivity, we'll get everybody back into work. Is that correct? I'm rather dubious about that, actually. And the second thing is, do we have too close a nexus between income and employment? Because that's how we measure unemployment. I mean, do we need to have a more looser system where people coming out of school or other forms of training, they have a mix of, say, paid employment, support and training, some degrees of community work, but some new system that ensures that nobody comes out of school and has nothing to do? Yes.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and it is a challenging issue. I can give some experience to being on a board of trustees for 18 years, and just recently in the last 6 years at our local college. One of the things that we found that was a real challenge for us is the issue around both the development of skills and training and actually alignment to actually relevant opportunities in the labour market. And for instance, we were having all these vocational training and opportunities in the years 12 and 13, and we weren't aligning to industry. An example that we had, and which follows the current government's introduction of trade academies into schools, is that we're now not only sort of creating these career pathways earlier, so for instance at year 9, so that actually our young people can actually track themselves into potential career opportunities in the labour market. And I think that's actually causing some real sort of wins there. For instance, the Liggins Institute are also doing the same thing for the University of Auckland. Why? Because we've had a shortage in the health sector. So what we haven't done in the past is align both the training opportunities and the career pathways with those opportunities in the labour market. And you can see there's been a real push back into apprenticeships, which is something that I'm very passionate about. And the very things that you're talking about, I think, that's the focus of where we're going as a government as well.
You asked the question, you said, is this a new phenomenon? The answer is no, it's not. Because at the height of the Great Depression in the 30s, in 1932, a man became the Prime Minister. Incidentally, he happened to be from the second biggest party, a man called Forbes, and he was determined to balance the books, and balance the books he did, even though there was massive unemployment and massive loss of opportunity and 10% plus deflation. But he balanced the books, and today it's got a similar ring about it. Because it's true the government has picked up some of our ideas announced by other parties, such as subsidising apprenticeships, subsidising the boss, giving the boss to share some of the costs, but it's worthwhile to the boss because he's got a lower overall wage cost factors. These are not National Party's policies, they're policies other parties have announced and they've partially stolen them, but they're not very good imitators. And the reality is that we're talking about fundamentally, you see, this debate can very soon shade into confusion because Some here on the stage are arguing for an investment in productivity and capital, and it's human capital, and employment and training and skills and education. But it's an investment in productivity in the sense that we need to get out there and exports and protect our manufacturers. What are the youth looking for? They're looking for a job. Well, it used to be, not so long ago, where over 30% of our GDP was manufacturing. Now it's less than 30% and dramatically falling out every day. And here's the worst effect. As more and more go offshore, more and more of those servicing them here in this country will themselves have to go offshore if they want to keep their associated contracts. This is a disaster, it's a cancer in our society, and sooner one of these days they'll wake up. And of course, if you apply the reasoning, well, you know, the price rules, the price will rule this thing, then what you're really saying is you don't care what sort of society we have. And my argument is this: how can a young person get a job in a country where the employer in this country, be male or female, risks everything with no help whatsoever, and is told, you pay for ACC, you pay for a health system, you pay for the decent things in a great modern society, and none of your competitors abroad have to. And we will give you no help whatsoever. So it's a serious argument that David Parker put his finger on when he said there is appropriate time for governmental intervention, because it's about what quality of society you want. And after all, what is the serious business of politics? Well, it's meant to be about expanding people's happiness. That's the number one objective of any politician, or should be. But you would not think so these days.
Stephanie.
Kia ora tātou. I'm Stephanie McIntyre. I'm the director of DCM. We're a social agency in the city, and we've got a focus on ending homelessness in Wellington. I was just mulling over today our figures of people that had seen us in our agency between October and December in 2012. There were 414 single individual adults who came to our agency during that period. 42 of them experienced rough sleeping or living in cars in that period, and 199 of them experienced some form of homelessness that met our own New Zealand, Statistics New Zealand's definition of homelessness. So in other words, they were living in crisis accommodation or boarding houses or couch surfing and so on. So my question to each of you individually, I'd like to know your personal opinion and also your party's position. Do you believe that housing is a basic human right for every New Zealander?
Could I, just looking at the timetable, make this the sort of final statement from everybody too, in answer to Stephanie's question? That perhaps we'll start, Alfred, at your end. Come back this way.
Thank you for that question. I'm on the Social Service Select Committee with my colleague over here, Jacinda, and there is an inquiry into boarding houses, but that's initially come out of the issue of dealing with homelessness. So,
is housing a basic human right?
Absolutely, housing is a basic human right. I was in what's called in Canada, in Toronto, with the Tyndall Foundation, and we looked at the way that they were dealing with homelessness and housing issues that they had there. One of the things I think that was quite interesting is that they had to reconfigure this whole thing around how do we see a home and a house. And what came out of that was the fact is that for them it was ensuring that you had the basic amenities that could meet their basic needs. Rather than a sense of ownership, it was more around the fact of being able to have the basic amenities and their needs being met. I think when we came back here, the Kiwi dream is to have your own home. I think we're fast going around to the point where we need to think about that and how we address that. But to answer your question, yes, I think it's important that a house is a need. But I also think there needs to be a challenge, because for some, there is a view that it's a state house for life, when in actual fact I think what we're wanting to do is to help people find their own opportunities. So I think it's balancing the two things together.
Kia ora, thanks for the question. Yes, absolutely. Housing is the core place of stability for a child and their family. And so stabilising and secure housing is absolutely critical to a family's ability to function and belong to a community. It's also critical infrastructure. One of the problems is it's not treated like its core infrastructure like roads are, or broadband or electricity provision. If we don't have the provision of housing for every single family and every single person who needs it in a community, we have a serious structural problem. So it needs to be treated as critical infrastructure by the state, which is why they need to intervene. But at the core, it's about a stable place from which a child can grow and learn and reach their potential.
Yes, absolutely. I won't address the social housing issue so much, although it's an important part of the solution. I haven't even yet given up on the dream that we should have increasing rates of private home ownership. I think it's very important for some of the societal reasons that I suspect most of us agree here on: stability of association with local school, having an interest in Johnny not tagging the local fence. Those sorts of societal pressures are, and mores are upheld if you have high rates of home ownership. I'm going to say something else though. One of the reasons that we've got pressure on housing in our cities is that people are deserting the provinces. I was in Oamaru last week where they've got 190 people being made redundant with a manufacturing plant closing down. The population projection for Oamaru is that over the next 20 years, the number of people over 65 will increase by 57%. The number of people who are of working age population, the number of people from 40 to 64 over the next 20 years decreases by 27%. There is a lot of housing and good infrastructure in our places like Oamaru, but there's no economic future for them there. Now, there are some trends there. Some people just don't want to live in a smaller town. But part of it is that the economic future in our regions is being hollowed out in a way which is putting more pressure on our cities, despite the fact that we've got a housing shortage in some of our cities. That's not to say that we don't need to have supply side solutions in our cities, but I've already talked about those.
I'd like to give you the same answer and ingratiate myself with you, but I suspect you're not voting for me anyway. There are 4 things that everybody in the world wants, and so do we in this country. They are decent, affordable housing. They're a decent health system because you need your health to be able to reach your potential. It is a first world living wage that you can live on. And you need education for those who are young and coming on, and even if you need to be reschooled for a future job. Those 4 things is what everybody in the world wants now. And in that sense, they are what our priority should be. But to get them, you've got to, first of all, be prepared to turn up at school and learn. You've got to be prepared to make some effort to keep your health good. And you can't go on eating, and I'm talking about the Maori world, 5 boil-ups a week because it's great and easy to digest. And I think it's fantastic, actually, myself. But you have to take some steps to contend with a new diet in a new age where you're not going without a meal for 48 hours and you're on some far-flung voyage as we were pre-European times. Likewise for housing. If you're in a family relationship, you need to come home and help pay the bill. Or we're just going to go and pay for all that regardless of how the proclivities of certain people are in society. And what I'm really saying to you is, I believe in a property-owned democracy. I was proud one time when we were perhaps one of the highest private ownership of property in the world. And we could get there again. We've got the resources and we've got the land. And the Labour Party you saw recently was getting totally done over in the House on the question of affordability, which shows you how far out of touch so many policymakers, commentators, and in fact politicians are to reality. You can build countless homes in Pukekohe, and as being happening now, for under 300,000, and West Auckland, and all over the place. But apparently you've got to live in Ponsonby and Jervois, around St Mary's Bay where we all live. Yeah, but I have not lost the plot. And like David Parker, there is a huge surplus in resources in Dunedin, Oamaru, Timaru, but if you don't help the provinces with your financial policy, they're going to keep on leaving. That's the tragedy. Our housing problem in New Zealand will never be solved if you don't have a regional policy to attract people to the regions. And you keep on bringing all these people from overseas and all these people from the countryside, and you put them in Auckland and you start saying, we're going to fix up their housing and their transport problems. Stop deluding ourselves and face the fact that there is a role for governmental wise intervention. And in that context, madam, yes, I do believe that you can fulfil that dream for people and make sure they have a home.
Very good. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Campbell Roberts just to sum up for us. Campbell, thank you for all you've done.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you to you all again for being here. I've spent, I suppose, the last 15 years moving around down the road here in the political environment And having many conversations with many people and politicians and officers, I often come out of those meetings and go home and think, actually things are not so bad. We really are starting to come to grips with some of those problems. But our officers for the Social Policy Unit are actually in a social centre in the middle of South Auckland. And I go back into that centre, and every day I've actually got to walk through the waiting room of people who are actually coming for assistance. And I guess it's their eyes, their faces, their tears sometimes, the little children sitting there that keep reminding me that actually, and I guess that's why we're calling for a new sort of leadership, which actually takes seriously and makes them priorities, these areas, and actually gets some change. There isn't enough change occurring, and there needs to be a greater level of change, and I believe it's across the board that needs to happen. I'm extremely grateful tonight for our politicians, for Winston, for David, for Materia, and for Alfred, and thank you very much for your contribution. What I have sensed today is your commitment to these issues. I've heard some of your passion, I've heard some of your, and so thank you. Thank you for making the time. We want to acknowledge the leadership that is given. We are asking for more leadership, but we also want to say we are grateful for what is being given and for the daily grind that goes on and the daily effort that goes on through select committees, through the parliamentary process to actually try and improve what's occurring. So thank you for your time. Thank you for your insights. Want to acknowledge other MPs. Jacinda, thank you for being here, and some have had to go, but thank you, we appreciate, and to you all for your willingness to share with us tonight in the launching of this report. Just finally to Bishop Richard Randerson, thank you for chairing us. Your mana in terms of these issues is known, and we thank you for that, and we thank you for chairing this in such a way. I would like to also acknowledge the presence and the contribution of Duncan Cottrell, who have been our partners over a number of years now in the Social Policy Unit, and who fund each of these reports. And so we're extremely grateful for their support and thankful for their ongoing support of the Social Policy Unit. Thank you all for your attendance, and may God be with you as you go out in your tasks.
Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ara ki a ihu karaiti, me te aroa o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga ki te wairua tapu,